This is the Vintage Aviation Podcast, where we talk about the fascinating first 60 years of aviation history, and we do it all in support of the upcoming print magazine, Vintage Aviation. Watch for our premiere issue Kickstarter campaign running the full month of July 2019, and connect with us through our website, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, all under the name Vintage Av Mag. And now, let's talk about Vintage Aviation. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Martt Clupper. I'm located in Warsaw in northern Indiana. Today is June 26, 2019, and this is episode number 2. Today's guest will be Dewey Davenport. Dewey flies corporate jets for a living, but he's also a modern-day barnstormer doing rides in fabulous old biplanes. Dewey and I had a great time talking about barnstorming and old biplanes. You can check out his Good Folk and Old Times Biplane Rides operation by going to his website at gobiplanerides.com. And hang on, we'll get to that interview here in just a few minutes. First, though, I wanted to let you know that things are falling into place for the Vintage Aviation print magazine, and I'm in the final process of preparing the Kickstarter campaign that will launch here very soon. If you're listening to this after July 1st, 2019, but before the end of July, you should be able to go to Kickstarter.com and search for Vintage Aviation and find the campaign that way. I hope you'll seriously consider supporting this unique flight history magazine project. You might already know that my goal with the print magazine is to cover aviation history from 1900 until about 1960 with entertaining and informative stories in combination with great historical images. All aspects of aviation will be covered, so there'll be no shortage of topics. One of the topics that will get ongoing coverage will be the age of the barnstormers. After World War I ended, there were a lot of pilots and a lot of leftover airplanes, so the two got together in the civilian world and some pretty wild things happened. And a lot of everyday people got their first direct exposure to the amazing world of flying machines. In my interview with Dewey, we talk about some of what that life was like, and we talk about the 1929 Travel Air and the 1930 New Standard biplane that he owns. So hey, let's get to it. Here's my interview with barnstormer Dewey Davenport. Well, welcome, Dewey, to the Vintage Aviation Podcast. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's great because this is the first guest for the podcast, and I thought you'd be a really good one to have for a variety of reasons, but one especially because you've got a really cool biplane operation with 2 airplanes and rides and a whole world that I want to learn more about and you can share with us. So why don't you, right off the bat here, kind of tell us about your operation?
Well, I'm the owner and operator of Good Folk and Old Time Biplane Rides here near the Dayton, Ohio area. Flew tons of people, in the barnstorming air and done other jobs afterwards. And it's kind of like an honor to have a business like this that has actually been, pretty prosperous and done very well for the 5 years that I've had it.
I see. Yeah, well, that's great. And it's a kind of a living history thing because these are literally true historic airplanes, and yet people are still able to experience them probably much like they would have, back in the day.
Yeah, that's the whole point is, I started in 2013 and I bought the Travel Air, the 1929 Travel Air from a gentleman out in Iowa, Gary Lust. And Gary had the aircraft for about 11 years and offered rides and barnstormed the airplane. Well, as a kid growing up, I told my parents that, hey, I love to have my own grass strip and I would love to buy a biplane and offer rides and do what barnstormers did because they kind of live free and live a good life. And just having a cool old airplane with a radio engine is something that, I think a lot of us aviators really would like to have, when we grow up is what a lot of people say. But, the Travel Air, I started out in 2013. At that time, I quit my job and I went out and went to like all the local fly-ins, bloom festivals, even air shows. I started my own fly-in event called the Barnstorming Carnival.
Wow.
All just to kind of like keep barnstorming alive. I
Uh-huh.
dress up like the Waldo Pepper, and I'm sure you watched Waldo Pepper,
Yep.
and we live and die by the great Waldo Pepper. And
Uh-huh.
I have some very good friends that I you know hang out with. We have antique airplanes, so a lot of influence from them helping me. Um, and it really has just been a wonderful experience when you take an airplane like that. I can go to a show and I guarantee you I get the same reaction that someone 90 years ago gave that pilot. That
Mm.
same reaction is really, it makes you feel so good.
I can imagine. And it's here's an aspect of this, because one of the things I definitely want to talk about in this episode is barnstorming in general and from the historical perspective. And one of the things that's really solidified with me in my research on that is that when the barnstormers were really in their heyday, let's say in the early 20s, and they were traveling around the country and getting the opportunity to show off for people and then potentially sell rides, the people were experiencing them almost like they were spacemen today or aliens from another world, because aviation was so new and was not within the popular culture yet. And so what an experience for those people. And then the other thing that I find fascinating about that is that nowadays we've gone so far past that, and we've got generations that have been raised in the jet age and such, so they're almost re-experiencing this very new world to them, that's now to us an old world where it was very new in the 20s. So it's just really cool how that all comes together.
Yeah, and you explained it very well. New pilots today, they really just, I guess I would say, just modern day people, they have no clue what barnstorming was. and
Mm-hmm.
and how in the heyday they were like gods. They would
Mm-hmm.
show up, and people were riding horses and horse and wagons. They never seen an airplane in their life, and you have this barnstormer come in, land in this little town in a field. They were like somebody very special. And
Mm-hmm.
there's books, Chewing Gum, Belling Wire, and Guts. It's about the Gates Flying Circus. It even explains like the pilots. They could break any rule. One gentleman got arrested for like reckless flying. Well, the townspeople went to the police station and like demanded that he gets out of jail because
Is
he's
that
like
right?
this god flying around.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, and it is kind of like, aliens and spacecraft showing up, in the field outside of town. And which is really cool, though, when you kind of wrap your head around that a little bit more, and you can see how the people would react that way. And then even more so, not only to see this for the first time and to see these guys doing maybe the show off stuff that they would do to attract attention in the town, but then to have the opportunity to actually be a passenger to ride with them, that just like over the top for these people. And as long as they had the money to be able to afford to do it, what an awesome experience for these people.
That's exactly. It was kind of like a status. If you were able to pay for a ride to go fly with a barnstormer, then you could brag about that you're able to be in that airplane and look at the earth from up above. So yeah, that's why they were so popular, so busy. And it really started. The barnstorming started after World War One, and the government would sell their old airplanes. They had Jennies, JN4 Jennies, and then they had these J1 standards, and those really were the airplanes of choice. And they could buy them so cheap. And then in the early 20s, the 1920, you know, here now you got this pilot, and then he can brag or say that he was this ace in the military and
Hmm.
fighter pilot. People would want to fly with him. Well, they just toured the country. A lot of them were individuals going on their own, but then you get someone like the Gates. They would go as a flying circus, a small group, and they took the country by storm. To be honest with you.
It is interesting when you look back at various aspects of aviation from the 20s and 30s at how massive the response from the public was, which is kind of foreign actually to us today. especially with what we've seen in the last 30 years, where in a way it seems like general aviation and some aspects of what we call sport aviation have diminished to some extent, at least within popular culture. The general public is further away, it seems, from aviation, and yet we see that some of the early air races and then the response that people had in the rural areas to these barnstormers coming through was just a wild response, massive and huge response, and so I'm on one hand I'm excited, to see what it was like back then, but I'm a little disappointed that today we have such trouble, it seems like, getting people to care about the aspects of aviation that I think you and I specifically love, which are a little different than just regular general aviation. They're the little bit more passionate side of it, which of course biplanes and round engines and tail draggers and all that fit right into that. And I think there's still a desire within more of the general public for that, but I'm not sure why we're not reaching them as well these days. But obviously you are with your operation. You are reaching these people.
Yeah, I do pretty well. One thing good for business today is social media. So, I do a lot of social media marketing through Facebook and Instagram and even YouTube. But, the problem is why we don't see the 50,000 people at an air show event is a couple reasons. Regulation, funding, is a big issue with air show funding and things like that. But then there just isn't a lot of activity or barnstormers per se that can do what they did back in the 20s and 30s. I would say there's probably a handful like actual barnstormers in the country right
I
now.
see.
I would
Yeah.
say less than 10. But, back then everything was new, daredevil,
Sure.
loops and rolls were new to everyone.
Right.
Here, now everything is kind of, jets and, avionics are a lot different. Everybody wants glass cockpits and, everyone uses ForeFlight. They don't use maps and things like that. So
Sure.
we've just kind of changed with the generations that's grown up here. And it is kind of sad just because the history is starting to dissipate and leave us. And I'm fortunate enough to know very little about what I do and still share a lot of it with, thousands of people each year.
Well, and I know you do a good job of that. I love the way that, like you said, that you dress up in the style of the era, and you have a great look, and you have a genuine passion, and I'm sure that, is received by the people that you're able to interact with, and that's awesome because that makes you, a great steward of that history, and you're giving these people an opportunity to maybe ignite a passion, even if it's just for a day, just that one experience for them. That's still great, though, and you never know. It may ignite, a passion for actually going out and seeking aviation. Here, real quick though, before we get too far beyond that, let's talk. So you mentioned glass cockpits and such. Well, but you're also a corporate pilot, or you're flying jets of some sort, and so that's a really interesting contrast to the fact. So it's not that you are only about older aircraft or the way things used to be. You're very much in the modern world as well.
Yeah, I fly for the largest fractional ownership company in the world, actually, and I'm flying a Bombardier Challenger 350. I'm a co-pilot, and I've been there 11 years. But yeah, it's pretty much the most advanced avionics out there. There's some newer jets with a little bit different avionics packages that are different or better nowadays. But you know, I started out in a J3 Piper Cub when I was in high school, and I progressed through flying DC-9s, Falcon 20s, and different aircraft. But yeah, now I fly an aircraft that is nothing but glass cockpits, leather seats, and we can fly up at flight level 450,
Hmm.
and do 560 or 80 miles an hour. So it is aviation. The airplanes kind of fly the same, but you study and do different things through your career and profession that you can go and progress with the modern world, but I like flying also back in the trailing edge of technology. That's what we call it.
Sure, there you go. I like that, the trailing edge. That's very good. Well, and here, maybe this is an unfair question. I know how it would be for me, even though I do love modern aircraft, at least aspects of them, and I'm a fan of experimental airplanes and new technologies, but I just have such a passion for the old way that things were done. And so my question is, so if you had the Travel Air sitting on the ramp and there's the Challenger sitting on the ramp, which one are you going to choose? Or is that going to vary by the day? Or like if you just literally had the choice to go pick one of the two to go fly, which one would it be?
It would be the Travel Air, hands down.
I see. Very good.
I'm an old school pilot, and I fly the Challenger for a job. It pays the bills, but my heart is antiques, general aviation stuff, and
Sure.
hands down.
Yeah. Well, that's what I thought, and that's kind of what I hoped too. Just, and again,
Yep.
I don't have anything against the modern stuff, but man, oh man, it's just, I guess that's the part that strikes me about vintage aviation is there's an element of passion and just a different kind of experience. It's a much bigger, fuller experience, I think, for a variety of reasons. One, the airplanes oftentimes require so much more from you, even just to be ready to fly, and then they're oftentimes uncomfortable. Or in open cockpit airplanes, they can be a little noisy, or it can be chilly if it's cold out, and so comfort isn't as much in the equation as it is today. But even in spite of all those things, though, the experience is actually heightened, in my opinion. Anyway, I think you'd agree on that, and it's just cool. And I wish more people would get a chance to experience that and actually be drawn into it. That's what I'd like to see, is more people drawn into that world.
Well, Mark, I'm telling you from my experience, I mean, I've been flying 25 years in my biplane business for whatever, 5, 6 years, but taking someone on a biplane ride, I've had people kiss me, hug me, cry because of when they were a child and their father or grandfather took them for a biplane ride. It brought back a memory
Uh-huh.
that strikes emotions. And I've seen this over and over and over again. You take that same person and you put them in a 737 and fly them to Las Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
they aren't going to be doing any of that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that is what, you know, uh, uh, a caregiver or caretaker of these aircraft, that is what we all experience. And that's really what it is. It's people that are able to, luckily afford the airplanes, but we're able to share it. And then sharing it to the people that really want to see it and love it. That's why we keep doing it. It's something that is we have to continue to do because it's history. We can't let it die.
No, I sure agree with that. And while we're talking again about the specifics of your operation, let's talk about the airplanes in a little more detail if we can. So one on the Travel Air, so it's a three-seater ultimately, with the room for two in the front seat. Is that right?
That's right. It's 2 passengers, one pilot. So it's
Yeah.
a 3-person airplane. And the airplanes, Travel Air started in 1926 by Walter Beach, Clyde Cessna, and Lloyd Stearman, which are very famous designers.
It's
And
pretty amazing when you think about it. The three of those guys together, it is just stunning.
it is. And, the airplane was built, after the CAA developed, which is pretty much the FAA now. So it's a certified airplane. The design of them on the rudder has a bump on the top of the rudder, and on the A wings, the wings on the top wing, it had elephant ear ailerons, so they were called A wings.
Okay,
My Travel Air has B wings, which it doesn't. It has just round wingtips.
I see.
Well, they call it the Wichita Falker because the airplane, when it was designed, it looked like a Falker aircraft, from
Hmm.
World War One. It looked just
Yeah.
like a D7.
PT7, yeah.
And so they come out of the factory. Mine came out as a D4000, and it had, I believe, a Wright J5 engine on it, like a 25 horse radial. Now I have a Continental W670, which is the same engine that a Stearman, PT17 Stearman would have. And a lot of travelers have been converted into that for a number of reasons of, parts and things like that, easier to get hold to. But, the airplane, I believe the wingspan is 33 feet. I can carry 66 gallons of fuel. I burn about 13 and a half gallons an hour. It's steel tubing fuselage. And then wings are all wood. So it's spruce spars and, spruce ribs or plywood ribs. And then it's covered. My airplane has some cotton on it and also some synconite, like polyester type fabric.
Sure.
But, all the flight controls are taken out of the front because for rides. So you can put the two people in the front. And, it looks like a Stearman. A lot of people think it's a Stearman, and it's kind of funny, but a Stearman's a little longer aircraft. Traveler is a little bit more short coupled, but a Stearman's only a 2-person airplane, and that's why a Traveler just does so much. It's a much better aircraft. It's antique. It's a real barnstorming airplane, and plus you can carry 2 people in the front, so you can share that experience with someone.
Yeah, well, and I can see where that's a good way to look at it, that there's the opportunity for 2 people to share the experience, but then also there's just the pure economics of you being able to have 2 paying passengers on board, and economics has to factor into everything, and which the way that specifically hits me is for the Plane Savers video YouTube series that Mikey McBrien just recently completed the season 1 for. I did a video on the DC-3 for a segment, and it was a history lesson basically on the DC-3, and the ability when they widened the fuselage from the DC-2 to the DC-3, and they were able to get 3 seats across in there. That was a real turning point for the airplane, because it meant now that the airlines could get enough paying passengers in it to truly make it profitable. And so the economics is an important part of that, and I can see where having the 2 seats up front really does help to make it a sustainable business. But then that cool side thing of it really would be, for many people, maybe not even comfortable going alone, being able to go with their friend or their mate or whatever. It just has to heighten the experience for them.
Well, it definitely, when I first wanted to start my biplane business, I said, oh, I want to get a Stearman. First biplane I rode in was a Stearman. But then, talking to my friend Jim Hammond, who's an antiquer, and then started doing some research, a Stearman is not a real good barnstorming airplane. And the reason is economics. I can go out and do rides. And, I can take, the age range that I've flown now is 5 months old to 94.
Wow.
So you can't take a 5-month-old in a Stearman.
Sure.
It just isn't possible. But I can take a 5-month-old in my Traveler because they're going to go with their parent or guardian.
Sure.
I've taken paraplegics. I've taken people with severe disabilities like cerebral palsy and things like that.
I'm able great experience for those people. Wow, that's just awesome.
Yeah, and what's cool about the Traveler that they have a door. I take the door off when I'm giving rides, but it's a very low. You can get in the cockpit a lot easier.
I see.
So that is one good reason why the Traveler is just a superior barnstorming airplane.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, hey, but let's take this to let's put it on steroids, because your other airplane is really unique in that it's got room for 4 people up in the front.
Yes. Well, the new standard is the king of the barnstorming era, and by far, I have a late model new standard, so it's called a D25 new standard. It was built in 1930. June 26th is actually its birthday. Wow. It will be 89 years old. So that airplane, how it really came about is you've already heard me mention the Gates Flying Circus. So Ivan Gates, the largest flying circus in the world, where they flew, a million people or a little less maybe. They traveled across the country. It took them a few years to travel from Long Beach, California, and their final base was Teterboro, New Jersey, which is the corporate jet capital of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they based, their final, base before they filed bankruptcy. But Ivan Gates wanted a 4-passenger certified airplane. And so he went to a guy named Charles Day. Charles Day is very famous because he was the designer for the J-1 Standard. The J-1 Standard was an aircraft that was used by the U.S. government to train pilots in World War I. And in 1915 is when that airplane, or actually 1917, is when the J-1 Standard came out. Well, he went to Charles Day, said, hey, this is what we want to do. And in 1927, they built, it's called a GD-23, which is stood for Gates Day 23. And then in 1928, they built a GD-24. And the difference is engines. So in the 23 was a Hisso, water-cooled V8 Hisso. And then in the 24 was a Wright engine, a radial. And then in 1929, I believe, Charles Day bought Gates out of the business. And that's why it's called a D-25. So that's a little history on that. It's a real cool history. But the airplane, they didn't build a lot. I believe around 80. I'm not exactly sure the numbers. And right now I tell people there's 8 flying right now.
I see. Okay.
And pretty much everyone that owns them are given rides. I mean, I do know one gentleman just bought one. He's not a ride hauler. He keeps it in a museum, but they fly the airplane and they do give rides. But, most of them are here on the East Coast. Rob Locke, he's a barnstormer. He has 2 of them, and he's been barnstorming for years. I mean, long time. And he does very well with his business. Everywhere I go, a lot of people say, "Oh, I've flown with Waldo." They call him Waldo. So, and that's Rob's business.
Yeah.
And Ted Davis, he's up in Madison, Wisconsin. He has one. He's been a big mentor for me. He's helped me a lot, and different things like that. But he's built. I believe he's building his 3rd one now, restoring.
I see.
Yep. But that airplane is unique, and I have a very unique one because I'm the only one with a Continental powered Standard. Everybody else is running Wright J6s, which are 235 horse and 760 cubic inches. And mine is 220 horse at 670 cubic inches. So I'm 15 horsepower less and 90 cubic inches less. But I do well with it. The airplane has the same wingspan as the J-1 Standard from World War One. It's kind of cool.
Which is pretty significant too. The size of it, and that's when you think about it, even just from modern aircraft standards. So you're essentially you're 5 people in a big airframe, and you've only got 220 horsepower. So it's pretty impressive, really, what it can do, especially when you consider there's a fair amount of drag being created by all of that, not so streamlined airframe. So it's pretty impressive to me.
It's when you learn how to fly tailwheel and vintage airplanes, you have to learn how to fly the airplane. And flying a new Standard, I don't care if it's with a Wright or my Continental, but you better learn how to fly the airplane, fly the wing. You got to fly the wing of the airplane. And that's kind of what the Standard, it flies so well, but when it lifts off, it kind of just levitates. But you have to let it levitate. You can't make it off the ground.
I see.
And there isn't anything streamlined about it. It has a lot of drag, and the top wing is pretty much 46 feet. The bottom wing is, I think, 33 feet, and it looks like a carnival airplane. That's why it's a flying circus. It has round wingtips. The entire wing is all wood, and it's a beautiful wing. And then another thing that's very unique about this airplane, the fuselage is aluminum L-track, and which aluminum's lighter. And
Yeah.
another thing, like the Travel Air and a lot of the other aircraft, they were steel tubing, so you had to weld the tubing together.
Uh-huh.
With the Standard, there's hardly any welding done. So their logic is, if you're barnstorming, a lot of barnstormers are in fields, rough fields. If you tore up an airplane, well, you could just get more aluminum L-track. You
I
can
see.
bolt it together or rivet it together.
Uh-huh.
Well, throw a bed sheet over it, put some dope on it, and you could fly it out of there.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Welders, anything required. So it's a very neat, structured airplane, and how it all fits. It's like a big erector set, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I have not seen the fuselage. I did some research and realized that it was built this way, but I want to do some research and find some images and to better understand that, because that's always fascinating to me, the way that different structures are used. And one thing that's important for people, many people already know this, but as we were moving from the 20s and towards the 30s and such, there was a real movement away from wood in certain aspects of aircraft use, and not that wood is an inferior material by any means, because we still build airplanes out of wood today. At least many home builds are built that way, and they can be fantastic. But wood is more dependent upon good care, and oftentimes, if the airplanes are sitting outside in the weather, in the rain and such, the wood becomes more of an issue. So having these really durable metals, whether it be steel or the aluminum-based fuselages, certainly I could see that adding a lot to the durability and the longevity of the airplanes.
Yeah, and nowadays, we definitely take care of these airplanes a lot differently. Because there's not a lot. All of them are collectors in some sense. And I own my own grass strip, and I build a building. And I have a Ronca Champ also. So I had this building built, and it's a huge hangar. Well, this big hangar I had built, I had a Champ, and that's all I had. But when I built this building, I built it big enough because I had dreams to own a new Standard.
I see.
And you have to build, this thing will not fit in a normal T hangar.
I can
So
imagine.
yes, I have a 14-foot tall door and a 50-foot wide door.
I see.
And that is, a bifold door wasn't going to work unless I built my building about 2 feet taller.
Uh-huh.
And, so I did a lot of planning. And when I decided to build a hangar, my goal was to build a hangar to fit a new Standard in it.
Uh-huh. Well, and by golly, it looks like that all came together for you, which is awesome.
Yeah. And it's, you know, this airplane does sit outside maybe 2 or 3 days a year when we go barnstorm,
Sure.
away from home,
Uh-huh.
but it will never, it never sees bad weather per se.
Yeah.
It can't
Well, and
afford it.
that's great for sure, because that not only, I mean, that creates an airplane that is going to be lasting an awful lot longer. And of course, if you're doing rides, you just want an airplane to be in the best condition it can be in. So
Definitely.
now here's an interesting thing. Now, and I've been around aviation since I was just a little kid, and I'm getting up there in age now. I'm kind of I'm not as young as I once was, but I learned a term that's related to the new Standard that I had never heard in my entire aviation life, and that is the sesquiplane term. And
Yep.
I was fascinated when because I had to look it up to think, well, what the heck? And I can see how it sort of fits with the whole sesquicentennial that we had in America when we were 150 years old. And the whole point being that it's like a wing and a half. So it's basically saying that the top wing, which could relate to the span, but as the definition I've seen, it actually relates ultimately to the wing area. But usually the second wing, which is almost always the lower wing in this case, is quite a bit smaller than the top wing.
Yeah, and that's, I would have said that, but I have a hard time pronouncing it. So the Sesqui wing is definitely, like you said, it's a smaller wing than the top wing or the other wing. And, when I've looked at it, I believe it says like half. So it's like
Yeah.
half the area. And
Yeah.
it may be that, but, if you look at
Yeah.
like Newport 17s, those World War One airplanes kind of
Yeah.
had those type of wings. But
Sure.
it's very noticeable with a new standard just because the top wing is just enormous compared to the
Yeah.
bottom.
Right.
Uh,
Because like
but it gives
on
it
the
a
Newport, or I'm sorry, I was just going to say on the Newport, it's predominantly through a really narrow chord that they get the little wing, and on the standard, you've actually got a lot shorter span on that lower wing.
exactly. And it makes it look cool in the air. I mean, it is just one cool machine with that big, the top wing is just gigantic, and then you got this almost like this little dinky wing, on the
Uh-huh.
bottom.
Yeah.
So
Really unique look. Well, so then let's talk a little bit about the flying of something like this, because when I've seen, I've been around a few of the ride operations and seen the new standards taking rides, and because it's a sizable airplane and such, I've just often wondered, well, what does it fly like, and what is it like in a crosswind?
well, it flies really well. Ted Davis, he jokes around. He's like, you can't tell people how well it flies. So when people ask how it flies, you say, "Man, this thing flies like a beast. It's the hardest thing. That's why there's only 8 left."
I see.
It takes a lot of skill, but
Uh-huh.
it there is some real tricky things about flying it with the rudder pedals and the brakes. So
Okay.
in the cockpit, I have 4 pedals, like full size
Hmm.
pedals that are hanging. So you got the rudder on the outside, and you have these brakes in the inside, and then the tail wheel is just a lockable, tail wheel. It's not really steerable or
I
anything
see.
like that. So when you take off, you make sure the tail wheel's locked, and once you're in the air, the airplane flies really well. I would say it flies, like a champ, something like
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Um, but handling on the ground, you have to use a lot of brakes.
Hmm.
It's very brake dependent. I on a real heavy crosswind. I was flying at an event yesterday. Every time I go to this airport is a direct crosswind.
Hmm.
It was probably a good 15 knots, and I had to fly all day. I flew almost 80 people,
Wow.
but you once you learn the airplane and you make sure you keep the wings down, you definitely make sure you do the right correction with the ailerons because this big wing, you let wind get under that wing.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
is when you're going to end up losing it.
Sure.
But once you get it down on the ground, heavy crosswinds, I usually will land the airplane,
I see.
and I will land it, get the tail down on the ground, and then I'll start getting on the brakes. And the problem is if you start slowing down and you have to use full deflection on the rudder,
Hmm.
it's hard to get your foot off the rudder pedals and get to the brakes because the brake will be possibly 4 or 5 inches away from your rudder pedals, and you don't want to take that rudder out.
Yeah.
So it just takes some practice and some learning, and a couple lock on the brakes up here, here and there to learn. Like
Yeah,
I shouldn't have done that. Uh,
I can imagine. Well, that Super Cub that I just restored has heel brakes on it, and I learned in a Citabria with heel brakes, so I actually like them. And I know a lot of pilots who have not experienced them do not like them because it can be a little bit of a gymnastic event trying to keep your foot on the rudder pedal and apply brake. But this is taking it to a whole new level, though, when you have a completely separate pedal, and you essentially, to some extent, you do have to relinquish control of the rudder to get to that brake then? Is that really what it amounts to?
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
you do.
Huh. That's
I was
interesting. Yeah.
flying. Sorry, I was flying at Ohio State Airport one day. It was 25 knot winds, and I tell you, it was exactly that. I mean, you're like full rudder deflection, and then you got to jump off of there and get on the brake, and
Mhm.
to keep the airplane from weather vaning and things like.
Yeah. Well, and especially with a ride operation like this, you're not getting to choose your weather conditions very well. Obviously, there's going to be a limit, and you say we can't do it, but you're also going to be running up to the limit a lot of times just because of a given day and such. So, what an interesting challenge there. And I'm imagining though, it's like anything. It's a lot like the airlines in that you develop the skills and you just know what you're doing, and you use caution, and you do a good job ultimately. So
Yeah, you
it's
try not to tear up anything, and I there's a couple events where I've stopped flying. I mean, I that's one thing I think. I do fly the airplane a lot. Honestly, I've flown like 1,500 people, over 1,500 people last year.
wow.
Well, but being even in the career aspect of learning kind of your limits, that's how I've been able to progress with this airplane. Is like, okay, it's too bumpy, it's too much gust. I'm stopping. So
Hmm.
I've been to some
Sure,
big shows where honestly, I'm backed up 2.5 hours, and I have to just stop, say,
sure.
and how I judge it. If it's not fun for me, it's not going to be fun for you. So
Yeah,
I'm
that's a
not
good
going to
way.
do it.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure, and that's where wisdom and experience certainly come into play there, and being able to make that call. And but I can see that it's just all the more a challenge. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I actually I knew Chuck LeMaster owned a Ford Trimotor, and I used to do the rides up at Oshkosh and over at Dayton. And in fact, one year I got to ride. Well, they had the Ford Trimotor one year, and then he had sold the Ford and had the Bushmaster 2000, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that was the modern Ford Trimotor that was built in the 50s. They only built two of them, and tried to market the airplane again. And so he had one of those and restored it and was doing rides. So anyway, I had a little bit of that experience of what it's like when you're trying to, run essentially a little airline, because that's what it is. They're just really short flights, and they're coming back to the same airport. But you have a lot of those same challenges that are weather and can be maintenance related as well. So anyway, it's real interesting though, and big challenge I can see, and especially it's just fascinating to understand how the rudder pedals are set up, and it sounds a little intimidating to me.
Well, it is, until you do it, and that when I bought it from a gentleman named Mike Hart, who he bought it. It was a crop duster
I see.
in Cleveland, Ohio, and he flew it out to the Boston area to where he had it for many years giving rides. But when I bought it, he talked to me. He's like, just don't get behind the power curve
Yeah.
and things like that. And what that means is you don't get behind the airplane. And
Yeah.
that's where I was kind of explaining, like, you have to learn the airplane. That's when you go out and fly it by yourself and you start playing with it and trying to understand it. But that's kind of what I do with all my airplanes. You start feeling it.
Hmm.
You don't fly off of numbers all the time. You fly by feel, seat of the pants, stick, and rudder. And that is one thing. This airplane is very comfortable in the cockpit. It's huge airplane, and I'm kind of, I'm 5'7", so I can sit down in there, and the windscreen keeps the wind from beating on me so bad.
Uh huh.
Then it all the controls are like humongous compared to my Traveler. The
I see.
throttle, the mixture, the stick, and the rudder pedals are just, they're like 747 size. And then it's but it's a very comfortable airplane, and I tell you, I'm really glad I have this airplane. It flies so well. You can fly a lot of people, and getting back to the economical aspect of it,
Hmm.
I can fly four people at a time.
Yeah, that's as if you've got the audience for it, boy, that's got to be great because ultimately, obviously, having these airplanes, maintaining them, and such is an expensive project, and so it's great that there's this economic avenue with multiple seats with both airplanes, then to generate enough revenue to make it both profitable for you for all your time and effort, but also to make sure that the airplanes can be continually cared for.
Yeah, and it's people don't understand it. It is like a new standard. It's twice as expensive as my house.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just trying to buy something like that and then
Sure.
take care of it, an
Uh,
engine, is $35,000. So it's always, you have to have some money in the piggy bank for, in case a bad day comes up, and
sure.
insurance. And another thing about a ride business, I tell people I'm a modern day barnstormer. And in my opinion, I mean, there's some older barnstormers out there, but I am, in my opinion, a master at marketing. And that is where I do very well, is that I've learned the social media aspect of it. And it's really helped me
Uh-huh.
grow the business. Back in the 20s and 30s, they had uh, promoters that would go out 2 or 3 weeks in advance and put flyers up and talk to the news media and things like that to get the townspeople excited about it. Well, I can do that through a computer,
Uh-huh.
and it's a lot of work, because I do everything. I do all the marketing, I build the website, and I'm not a website designer or anything, but I'm trying to learn all this stuff. And then
Sure.
you go and try and practice, different things, putting some road signs out here or contact the radio station and things like that. So
Uh-huh.
it all costs money.
Yeah, for sure. But it does sound like with the volume that you mentioned, that of passengers that you flew just last year, that's very impressive, though. That obviously you've got a system that's working, and that's fantastic because it is exposing people to a aspect of aviation that even with this modern generation, they maybe don't even know that it did exist. Where if you go back 40 or 50 years ago, well, everybody knew that kind of flying existed at one point in time. But even this younger generation, they're so far beyond that that's not a history that they may know anything about. So it's just great that this is a way for people to get exposed to that and at least educate them, and hopefully they're actually going for a ride with you and experiencing that. And then I'm sure there's a small percentage of that of those folks that are moved by it, and they can't shake it, they can't run away from it, and they eventually wind up being drawn into aviation because of it.
Yeah, that's what we all hope. And I hope to actually just try to grow aviation in general. And I do a lot of outreach stuff with kids in schools. And like I said, my barnstorming carnival event, I kind of fund most of that event myself,
I
along with
see.
the city of Springfield. They support me, but I don't go out and ask a lot of people for assistance and money. But I have clowns and bounce houses, but we do rocket building, and we have gliders for these kids. They get to build them, and
I
it's all
see.
free,
Ah,
and
that's
so
great.
parents can bring their kids there and not have $5 on them, and they still can come and have fun. And then all the barnstormers that come in, my very close friends, normally I can get 70 airplanes there, but some of the very close barnstormers, they all open up their airplanes. They let the kids and their families set in these Wacos and
I
Pete and
see.
Poles and Champs and Cubs. So it's
Uh-huh.
very hands-on type of event, and it it's uh it's really the outreach. That is really why I continue to do it. I'm on my 6th year of hosting this event,
That's
and
great. Yeah.
it's
Well,
a
and when is it?
It's July 13th and 14th. Um, we always do it about a week before Oshkosh.
Okay.
And the reason is that the barnstormers, it's if you ever watched a video called Barnstorming, Andrew King, Andrew's a good friend of mine. He flies my airplanes for me when I need help. But
I see.
Andrew started this thing 20 years ago, him and Frank Pavliga. And we go out to Indiana and we visit a family out there and spend the night. And this family has 8 kids. It's a dairy farm. And we stay the night and we land out in their hayfield. We have a humongous barbecue. And it's just like this big family of friends that fly into this family's house. And then we leave, and next thing is Broadhead, which is the Pete and Pole fly in, Pete and Pole and
Uh-huh.
Hat in. And then Oshkosh starts. So all these
Uh-huh.
airplanes start migrating up to Oshkosh or to Broadhead.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, that sounds like a good idea to time all those things together. And what an exciting month, basically, or 2 weeks period time there with so many great vintage aviation experiences.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Pete and Poles show up. Some will show up at my event, but they start heading out. But when you're in a Pete and Pole, air camper and you have a tent and a duffel bag of clothes, those clothes get a little ripe after about a week. Actually, probably after about 3 or 4 days. And
Yeah.
kind of funny seeing the guys with the peat poles, what they're doing by the end of the week.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I was hoping that when we recorded this that I would be able to say that I had just flown from California to Indiana in a little Baby Ace, a home-built Baby Ace airplane, which is a lot like a Pete and Pole. It's just kind of
Yeah.
similar. And I did start on the trip. I don't know when that was, a week ago or so. And I only got the first leg in when I developed an oil leak with the airplane and had to turn around and go back. And so I didn't get to do that. But the first night, I slept on the ramp right next to the airplane in Auburn, California. And so I was anticipating I was going to have very much that experience, probably a very ripe experience by the time I would have reached Indiana. But as it turned out, it just didn't work out. I was headed out, just starting to head out over the Sierra Nevada mountains early in the morning before the sun came up, and the engine developed a little leak, and it was actually a fairly substantial leak, but not one that was actually threatening the running of the engine. And so anyway, but the one thing I was going to say about that was that I think I got 5 hours in that Baby Ace a week and a half ago. And that was the first time that I can remember ever flying in an open cockpit airplane by myself. Now, I'll have to clarify that because I was also raised around home-built breezy airplanes, which have no cockpit around you. You sit completely in the front of the airplane, and I have a lot of time doing that. But it's kind of a different experience, and I really enjoyed the open cockpit experience. And of course, you've got that with both of your airplanes.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's when Andrew's here, we go to some big events. I'll take both biplanes. I feel like the Gates Flying Circus. We're in formation, flying across, the Indiana or something, and we can give hand signals to each other. It's just like,
Sure.
man, it. You have to pinch yourself, and
Uh,
you got the wind blowing, the sun's coming down. We're going around, thunderstorms or something. It's the craziest, funnest experience. It's true Americana, and I'm so blessed to be able to do it and share it. But man, you're exactly right. It's when you're sitting there and you got the sun in your face and you're looking out and you're in this airplane by yourself. You, to me, it's just like I'm in my element. So,
yeah. Yeah.
and
Well,
I know there's
it's an experience like nothing else. I mean, I mean, even motorcycles, while they're great, there's just a whole nother level to flying, let's say, an open cockpit airplane. It's an amazing experience, and I'm really appreciative of the fact that your operation is out there sharing that with people, even if it's not people that are going to have any ongoing interest. It's just that experience alone for them. It's something they would never forget, and I'm just sure that they enjoy it immensely. And so I'm really thankful that you're living on, carrying on the barnstorming aspect of aviation. It's just really great.
well, I appreciate it, and it's just been a lovely experience, and I'm grateful for the customers and the people that come and take the rides, and my friends that support me and help me. Without support and help, I wouldn't be able to have the business that I have, and have the cool airplanes. I mean, it's one thing that's really cool is the company I work for. They decided to have a fly-in, which I work for a company with 2,400 pilots.
I see.
They decided to let the employees, the pilots that own their own airplanes, fly in to the headquarters.
Hmm.
How many cool companies do something that cool?
Yeah,
Well,
that's very cool.
I said I got to go. I mean, I can't miss that. So another friend that flies my Travel Air, he took the Travel Air, and then I took the Standard in,
Uh-huh.
and we're both dressed up as Gates Flying Circus, or I'm Mr. Gates
Uh-huh.
is what my name is. But you know, there's nothing wrong with Bonanzas and an
Sure.
RV. I want an RV, so badly, but you pull up on a ramp like that,
Yeah.
people just look at you and say, what is this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, and that is part of the experience. I'll have to admit that I because I was raised around the breezy airplanes, and then we had a Wilga for a while, which is a very unusual airplane. So I really like unusual airplanes because they do attract attention. And it doesn't have to be a pure show-off kind of thing, but it's just fun to be part of something unique. And yeah, you get that, I'm sure, in a really big way, especially with the Standard, because it's such a big airplane and so pretty that that's just got to be a lot of fun to see the enthusiasm and response that you get from people when you show up somewhere.
yeah, it is. I had the FAA guys come to me and they have no clue what it is, but and they question. They're like, "This must be an alteration on it to put 4 people in it." I'm like, "No, that's the way they're made."
That's right.
Because they're used to modern jets and
Sure.
modern airplanes, and
Yeah.
they've never seen anything like this.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's really cool. Well, now, so here, we'll go back to this, give you a choice thing. So the Travel Air is sitting on the ramp and the Standard is sitting on the ramp, and you just get to choose which one. Is it the same choice every day, or would that change, based on the situation, maybe, which one you
Well,
choose?
that's a loaded question there now, because my business is built off of Ace, my Travel Air. So Ace has a big heart, and
Yeah,
when it goes to flying characteristics, the Standard.
really.
But for the Travel Air, when it's on the ramp, people see that and they want to ride the Travel Air because the paint scheme,
Yeah,
it's painted up in the Flying Aces Air Circus actual paint scheme.
I see.
And I'm not kidding you. If you're 100 yards away and that thing's sitting on a ramp, Ace is saying, "You want to take a ride with me?" That's what it says.
That's great. Yeah, I can believe it. Yeah, I can believe it. So,
And
well, that's great, though.
Yep. So that's what I love my Travel Air, and I don't fly it a lot anymore because when I go to a big show, you want to take the airplane that can fly the people.
Sure. Well, and I imagine you can't trust the Standard to very many people because it's a challenging airplane, I'm sure, for a variety of reasons, some of which we've already covered. So that makes sense for sure. But anyway, well, that's great. They're beautiful airplanes, and I just really love the way you're going about everything. And I think it's really cool that you're also a corporate pilot or flying the heavy metal too. It's just all makes for a great story, and it fits into what Vintage Aviation, the magazine, is going to be all about. One thing I definitely want to cover in many articles, if the magazine is able to successfully launch and become something ongoing, would be barnstorming, that whole era. Understanding, how it came to be in greater detail and the characters that were part of it, and then the reasons why it changed, which it did change significantly for sure as regulation came to play. And so it's all a really interesting part of aviation history, and I hope to be able to cover it in great detail. But it's just awesome that you're in 2019, you're out there living that life pretty extensively, and that's just really great. So really appreciate all that you do, and very much appreciate you being here for this this podcast. And your point of view is fantastic, and I just hope and wish you all the best.
Well, I really appreciate it, and same here. I'm here to support you, and we definitely could use more people like you to produce magazines and articles to share the history. So you just contact me anytime you need it.
Sounds good. Well, hopefully maybe we'll do this again sometime. So thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That interview was so much fun. It's always great to chat with another aviator with a real passion for vintage aviation. A big thank you goes out to Dewey for being the first guest here on the podcast and for his efforts to bring the fantastic world of vintage aviation to the people of today. For episode 3, I'll have my old friend Chris Lehner here to talk about his replica of the Mechanics Illustrated Baby Ace home built from the 1950s. It's sure to be another great interview. And lastly, I want to say that I believe the best future we can build for aviation is one where we know as much as we can about the past and we use it to shape the future. Thanks for listening to the Vintage Aviation Podcast, and I hope you come back for more.